Hey everybody, what's going on? Today we're starting off a brand new series, and that is the best place to sit on a park's roller coasters. Yeah, it's a bit of a working title, but it does the job. I'll be going through every existing coaster, big and small, and tell you the benefits of each row, and even the specific seats in some cases. Even if you don't ride a ton of roller coasters, you probably know that where you sit can make a huge difference depending on the ride, so I'll make sure to help you get the best ones. If you go on to find this video enjoyable and helpful, make sure you smash the like button and subscribe for more coaster content. Make sure to chuck me a follow on Instagram as well, and without further ado, let's get into the video. Like I said, the row you sit in can really make or break your experience and overall opinions of a roller coaster. This can be because of smoothness, intensity, views, and overall forces. Generally, the front has the best views and sense of speed, but the back is more intense because it's being pulled through the elements. This can vary throughout different rides, so I'll give you my tips on each one. The ride ops will usually take row requests as long as you're nice about it, and I almost always request one. If you like this series, make sure to let me know and I can continue it for other parks in the future. Just for fun, I'll start out with the park's oldest coasters and work my way up to the newest ones. But real quick before we do that, I want to talk about two defunct coasters. You can't ride Firehawk or Vortex anymore, but in my opinion they are both very fun rides. Firehawk was more intense in the back, especially as you got pulled through that loop as you plunged headfirst towards the ground. This was pure insanity and I always went for the back. Vortex was another coaster that I preferred in the back. The first drop was outstanding in that back car. It was one of the few coasters that made my stomach drop consistently in the back, along with one of the strongest airtime moments at Kings Island. You did get more legroom in the front of the cars, but Vortex was a back row ride as well. Kicking off the list, we have the coaster that started it all, the iconic Racer. It opened in 1972 with the park and was built by PTC. This means it has these trains and they have a major trick to riding them. If you sit on a wheel seat, it's much rougher, so you should always avoid them. What's a wheel seat, you might ask? Well, it's simple. The middle row of each car is off a wheel seat and therefore smoother than the front and back. The one exception of this is the very front row, so the middle of each car and front two rows are smoother. Now this is only when you see these specific trains, so don't always go by this rule, only with these. Racer did recently get a retrack in the first half and is much smoother, so a back row ride is way more enjoyable than it used to be, but it's still a bit shaky. If you're not fazed by rough rides and want to experience the ride's drops to their full potential, give the back a whirl, but the second to back is a safer option. My nomination for the best row on both sides of Racer is the very front. You get the awesome views of the wooden track and get great floater airtime over the hills. There's also a moment or two of ejector airtime up there, not to mention it's very smooth. You also get the best views of the other trains so you can know if you're winning the race. Speaking of the two trains, which is better? With the retrack, they're both pretty similar, but I still find blue a bit smoother. I think red has stronger airtime though, so I typically go for red. If you want to hear more about the Racer, make sure you check out my full review of it as well. Next up is the first of the park's three kiddie coasters, Woodstock Express. This was also built by PTC and opened with the park in 1972. Unlike the Racer, which I've ridden a ton, I barely ride this thing. But if you have younger kids or are just eager to boost your coaster count, this ride doesn't have a max height requirement. It does, however, have very tight trains, so some of you may end up sitting sideways, which is pretty funny. It's not that rough of a ride though, and is pretty tame in the middle, so younger riders may enjoy that. These trains do have buzz bars, and you actually get a little bit of airtime in both the front and back, so I'd recommend the back for the best ride, but don't expect much. I mean, it is a kiddie coaster. I definitely talked about that too long. Moving on to the Beast. The Beast was built completely in-house and opened in 1979. It is still to this day the world's longest wooden roller coaster. It really doesn't have airtime, so you should focus your seat off smoothness. Of course, this ride is about the journey through the woods and lateral forces, so sitting up front is a ton of fun. I love taking in the views as you rip down that 7,359 feet or 2,243 meters of track. The front always causes my eyes to tear up from the winds, and I always just have a blast with it. If you're going off the smoothest rides possible, the Beast does follow the same rules as Racer, where the very front and middles are the best. If you want the absolute smoothest ride, I'd say go to row 17 or 11, but 17 is slightly better. Yeah, I'm now just realizing I've ridden this thing a lot. So those are the best rows, and I personally nominate row 1 as my favorite. Next up is Adventure Express, the park's Aero Mine Train. It opened in 1991 and is one of the better themed rides in the park. It is meant for families and is on the jankier side, but is actually one of the better mine trains out there. It definitely pulls you through the drops a bit faster in the back, but it feels smoother and it's just more fun up front. The wind is nice, and since the ride doesn't offer any airtime, it's just fun to take in the views. This ride does actually have some pretty cool stuff to look at, with the woods, tunnel, and of course, whatever the heck this is. Next is the one, the only, Great Pumpkin Coaster. I know you're all just dying to get on this E&F Myler kiddie coaster that opened in 1992. In all seriousness, it doesn't really vary through the different rows, and it's obviously not meant for enthusiasts. You do typically need a kid with you to get the credit, but maybe if you buy a kid ice cream, he'll ride it with you. If you haven't watched the Theme Park Worldwide vlog, that probably doesn't make sense, but he legit did that, it's kind of funny. I'm gonna pick the back row here because you do get to experience the full 8-foot drop, woo, and maybe get a tiny bit of lift over the hills. I don't know how we're gonna follow up from that, but I guess we'll do it with the Bat, which opened in 1993. This aero suspended coaster, albeit short, has a fun kick to it. It's really not that rough for its age and offers a pretty unique experience. The front has some cool views as you swing side to side, but the back is definitely my favorite for the first drop and pull through each element. This ride just feels way more out of control in the back, so if you're looking for a more intense ride, go there. But for those of you who like seeing the track above your head as you swing, go to the front. And with all these coasters, if you want the tamer rides, head towards the middle of the train. 6 years after the Bat, Kings Island added Flight of Fear in 1996. It was built by Premier Rides and was the first coaster to use an LIM launch. This ride isn't the smoothest out there, but it does have lap bars to compensate. Unfortunately, these lap bars do have shin guards that cover your feet. If you sit on the right side of the train or the side closest to where you get on, one of your feet will be uncomfortably smashed the entire ride. You're still a little crammed on the left, but it's much more comfortable on your feet. So if you know this and your friend doesn't, try and get in the train first. Now for the row, I'd 100% recommend the front for Flight of Fear to best experience that launch. You do feel some wind just from traveling so fast and can somewhat see the mess of track that is that spaghetti bowl. But yeah, the front's the best here, no question. Next up we have the Vekoma Inverted Boomerang in Vertigo, which opened in '99. I personally think this ride gets too much hate because it's actually pretty fun. It's not horribly rough and pulls some pretty decent positives. It's one of the few rides that can cause me to gray out at Kings Island. If you have a group of 3 or 4, it's fun to face each other and see your reactions. But if it's just 2 of you, the front or back is the best. That way you can see the track and experience one of the laps to its full intensity. If you want the more intense ride with a group, I'd go near one of the edges but not the very front or back. For my nomination, I'm picking the very front row, which is the row to the far left in the station. This way you go forward first and backward second. This row is fun on the way up because the only thing keeping you from falling straight to the ground is those restraints, and it's a weird hang time like sensation. The next coaster is also an invert built by Vekoma, but this time for the kids. Flying Ace Aerial Chase, albeit for kids, is often nicknamed one of the Vekoma Hang and Bangs. I've only ridden this once for the credit, as one without children should, but I didn't find it too rough. It's just a fairly basic ride, and I'd recommend the front for the smoothness and best views. But like some of the lower tier coasters at parks, it's not really the biggest deal if you don't get a row, because it's just a smaller coaster. But if you really want, go with the front. The last coaster that was built before Cedar Fair acquired the park was Italian Job, now known as Backlot Stunt Coaster. This ride is a Premier launched family coaster and is a clone of the one at Canada's Wonderland and King's Dominion. This ride is pretty fun and has some of the best on-ride theming in the park. I'd go with the front row for that first launch and best views of all the theming. This ride isn't insane or anything, but it's pretty fun no matter where you sit. Moving forward, we have the 4 most recent coasters, all built since Cedar Fair acquired the park. These are often considered the park's big 4, and for good reason. The first is Diamondback, which opened in 2009. This B&M hypercoaster has staggered seating, meaning it has 16 rows instead of just the typical 8. This causes for the back row to really get pulled through the elements, which we'll talk about in a second. The staggered seating means that some are close together and others are apart or on the wing seats. The odd numbers are the close ones and even numbers are the wing seats, and I personally prefer the wings. You feel much more exposed since you're not right next to anything. It also feels like you get a bit better airtime on the sides. Diamondback in the front row does have awesome views and great flojector into the hills, but the back row is where it's at. You get yanked down that first drop and experience very strong and sustained flojector airtime, followed by some massive camelbacks. They all just give a little floater going in, but then you're ejected even harder on the way down. I love Diamondback in the back row, and it's an elite coaster in my opinion if you ride it there. And just a fun fact, you can stick your arms out behind you and get drenched on the splashdown, but only in the back row. Staying in the realm of B&M coasters, we've got the park's Invert Banshee. Banshee opened as the world's longest inverted roller coaster in 2014 at 4,124 feet or 1,257 meters. This ride is massive and really fun. It has some good intensity to it, but not as much whip as many of the older inverts. For this reason, it's not as drastically different in the front or back as a ride like say Raptor or Montu. It still has some noticeable differences, mainly in smoothness. Banshee does have vest restraints, so you won't get head banging, but it has a very strong B&M rattle. If you're bothered by these, I definitely recommend sitting up front because it's much less noticeable up there. You also get a lot of wind in your face and those awesome views of the track above you. The front has been my favorite on Banshee ever since I first did it, but this year I've had trouble deciding between the front and the back. The back is shakier, but like I've said before, I'm not really bothered by B&M rattles. The back is noticeably more intense and you get whipped down that insane first drop. This is the first decision that I'm not really sure about because both the front and back have their major pros and cons. I'd take either row happily, and it just depends if I want more intensity or more smoothness and better views. So you can obviously take your pick there. And Banshee definitely has a bite, so if you're sensitive to roughness, I would just go for the front, but I think I'm going to choose the back actually. Like I said, it's really close, but it's just so intense and really fun. The more that I think about it, the front is really good too though, and the overall experience is just amazing. Since it does have 4 across seating, the 2 edge seats are a little more intense and you feel like you get whipped around more. This is especially noticeable in the 0G roll because the weightlessness is far superior on the edges. So I'd say back right or left is the most intense ride on Banshee, but front left or right is probably just the most all around fun. Our second to last coaster is Mystic Timbers, the GCI Woody that opened in 2017. This ride is relentless from start to finish no matter where you sit. It warms up significantly throughout the day, so try your best to ride it later on. A lot of people prefer it in the front because the sense of speed is ridiculous and the quick ejector pops seem a bit stronger. I love the front and it is hard to choose, but I'd actually go with the back as my favorite. You get pulled through the elements faster and it just feels more out of control. Don't get me wrong though, the front's amazing and just like Banshee, I'd recommend them both. Mystic is still glass smooth as well, so you don't have to worry about roughness. It honestly might be the smoothest ride in the park. And in the front, you don't get the full experience of what's in the shed because you start entering the station before you're done. And yes, I'm not going to spoil it to the 1% of you who somehow don't know what's in the shed, because that's clearly the reason you ride this ride. Not really, the ride's way better. And finally, the most recent coaster, Orion. Orion is the B&M Giga Coaster that opened in 2020. It has a height of 287 feet and a drop of 300 feet or 91 meters, just barely making it a Giga Coaster. I absolutely love this ride in every row. Rows 2 through 8 are honestly pretty similar, though the back is definitely superior out of them. The front, on the other hand, is a whole other monster. Looking 85 degrees down that 300 foot drop is absolutely awesome, and going 91 miles per hour with nothing in front of you is insane. You can barely keep your eyes open from the amount of wind, along with graying out at the bottom of the first drop. Those views and wind in your face are unbeatable in the front, though the airtime on the first drop and banked hill at the end are better in the back. I've definitely done Orion more in the back since the front often has a long line, though I highly recommend you check them both out. This one is definitely hard to pick because the views and wind are pure insanity in row 1, but the airtime is definitely better in the back. And just like Banshee, the outer 2 of the 4 seats are more intense. This is similar to how the wing seats on Diamondback are, just without the extra freedom. You move off the axis more on the turns and the airtime overall just feels stronger. For example, you get a little weak floater in the wave turn on the far right, but a little more laterals on the left. This is coming from someone who's ridden it over 50 times, so yeah, I might know what I'm talking about. Orion is a real toss-up for me, just like Banshee. I love the back for the better first drop and overall better airtime throughout the ride, but the views and wind in the front row are just downright incredible. I'm going to pick the front on the right side for my best pick. I think the forces are better in the back, so I often take the back since it has a shorter line, but some of my most memorable rides are in the front row. I also chose the far right side because you're closest to the park and get the best views. You also can get some weak floater airtime in the wave turn, as well as being whipped more on the final banked hill if you're on the right side. I think the airtime's just a little stronger on the right. I highly recommend you try Orion in both the front and back and let this ride warm up because it definitely does later in the day. This was definitely one of the harder picks because Orion is amazing in the back and I think the front just barely edges it. But if you don't care as much about wind, sense of speed, and views, you're probably going to prefer the back. Alrighty, that wraps up the best places to sit on every coaster at Kings Island. In case you didn't know, this is my home park, hence why I've ridden some of these rides so much. I definitely had fun sharing my opinions on the best rows and seats, and I hope they help you to get better rides. Let me know in the comments if you agree with my selections or what your favorite rows are, as well as letting me know if you want to see more of this series. And of course, those are my opinions, so I'm allowed to have them just like you're allowed to have yours. Thanks everybody for watching, and as always, stay safe, keep riding coasters, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!